The degree of uniformity is in proportion to the degree of stupidity. I like that. Maybe that's why I wrote it down. I wonder who said it. I was in grammar school. One day a year was Eric Day.
At your grammar school?
Yeah. Then I'd drag whatever monstrosity I'd contrived at home, and then the school janitor would have to come and certify that it was safe to plug into the wall outlet. You know, he didn't have a clue. And then the bully got to get shocked. The teacher would force it to happen and make a mockery out of him in front of the entire class, and then the rest of the year he wasn't a bully.
And how many
He was
volts?
the guy who would get bit.
How many kilowatt hours?
Well, you know, I made sure to keep it, you know, less than like 5 milliamps or, you know, 10, just, you know, about like getting slugged by a baseball bat, but it's not nothing to really, you know, do any damage to your body. It scares you more than anything. About nuclear meltdown in my parents' garage and how it blacked out the radars at Hamilton Air Force Base. We went through the rite of passage, so to speak, by creating this disturbance in the neighborhood and controlling it, so we were allowed a higher access after that point. Because all their, you know, original Operation Paperclip scientists are all getting old and dead.
How'd you
I was the next generation. I was a 16-year-old with 3 FCC licenses, radar, television broadcasting, the whole thing.
So you were well known.
Well, I don't know, but that must have attracted somebody's attention. It's the main station to the whole Pacific. Japan, to Australia, everything went in and out of Bolinas and Point Reyes.
All American communications in 1969 were going through Bolinas to communicate with the Pacific.
Right. After a year, I could go into that station in the morning, okay, unannounced. I could grab the key ring off the fucking hook, and I could go through the entire installation in any fucking substation or transmit anything
Complete
I wanted.
100% access.
Just whatever I wanted to do. And whatever I fucking dragged back, if it had the right numbers on it, I could pack it home.
Wow. You're bad. Oh, you're a bad boy.
Yeah, well, I didn't walk in there as a dummy.
How old were you when you went in?
Oh, that was 1966, I think.
How old were you?
15.
So you had free run of the premier...
Not then. No, I had to work for it. And go through some punishment routines, too, when I got a little out of line. Like disappear for a year once.
Oh, that's a little bit out of line.
That's when I started when I was a freshman. And by the time I was a senior, I had an awesome laboratory. It was giant.
Wow.
You know, I could produce 3,000 or 4,000 watts of RF, no problem at all.
So you could light up a whole neighborhood.
Well, I could make all the lights, you know, dim the lights in the whole neighborhood, sucking that much power, about 10,000 watts off the transformer.
What is glomming?
That's to get a hold of stuff for free,
You were
without
very
having
good
to
at
pay
that.
for it.
You developed that skill early in life.
You have to. Otherwise, you don't have anything to work with. No one's going to buy it for you. You have to go find it. You got to find it, you know, pushed over a cliff, or get the lineman to give it to you for free, or whatever. Otherwise, you don't have anything to work with. It was a rapid developmental phase.
So in
I
high
had
school,
standard surplus in San Francisco for my Navy glom. I had Abe and Louie. They were the glom meisters. They had their fingers in everything. They had catacombs underneath the sidewalks into the street, filled with like missile parts and all this stuff. And they just let me go down to that bed, just let me run loose with a shopping bag. They thought it was funny, you know?
that was good.
And they couldn't figure out what in the hell I was doing with all this stuff, but they knew I was doing something with it. And I was a kid, so, you know, I'd buy something and just let me take the rest for free. And no one else was allowed in the catacombs.
Only you.
Yeah.
Only Eric.
There was like a crazy guy down there that had his own glom collection. The problem was getting his stuff past the counter because it became confusing of whose stuff's what. And he wasn't supposed to be giving his GLOM away, and he was giving me all these expensive big Navy radio transmitting tubes and vacuum variable capacitors, and I was, I built a whole Navy transmitter in a matter of just months out of this stuff from there. It was beautiful. I even used part of it at Landers. It lasted that long. And then RCA started providing the big oil transformers and giant tubes, and the stuff from the power company, all the big capacitors. It turned into a giant Frankenstein laboratory.
What was your biggest challenge?
Well, trying to control all this RF and developing the power supplies and the tubes and the resonant coils, and that's where I independently discovered the whole Tesla thing.
So at the age of 15, you independently discovered the...
Yeah, the resonant coil and the monopolar transmission and the whole deal. It occurred right there on my bench out of old RCA parts.
At the age of
But I didn't know about Tesla. I had no idea about Tesla. It didn't matter. This stuff just worked. It was like beyond the edge of what RCA understood. So they were always perplexed by the things that would get to happen with their equipment. But then they learned from that. That's why they were having problems earlier, that they never could figure out why. I ended up finding out why. Why this ball lightning would get out of control in the transmission lines and start breaking insulators and fireballs leaping around everywhere, and the technician just dives for the deck. When the captain decides, here this guy shows up and now he's altering everything that's going on in this base, okay, and wrapping a noose around the Air Force and just leading them by a ring through their nose through balls of fire, they're digging it, okay?
So you were the Navy's hero.
Digging it. I don't know my right from left. I can't tie my shoelaces. Yeah, so they have the captain's inspection. Of course, I fail. So the captain curses me and the whole thing, and I'm thrown out of line and all that. And he looks at me and he goes, "Dollard, you are a slob." And then he goes, "But you do such damn good work, get back inside." This was the entire defense communications system for the Pacific, South China Sea, the whole thing. I worked right at the central link. Just for fun, with nothing to do on a mid-watch. You could go through the boards and find telephone calls that were absolutely flabbergasting. To believe that you had any privacy and long-distance telephone communication, you couldn't believe how many people were laughing at your telephone call behind your back. These things would just erupt at 1 or 2 in the morning from some bored technician, going through all the channel jacks and channel jacks and channel jacks until he hears that telephone call that's just out of this world. Usually some drunk sailor talking to his girlfriend. That's what most of them were after. Okay, and out it pops on the monitor speaker. Okay, so you got a telephone that when you lift it, every DCS station has a speaker that hears what you say. It's called the order wire. So you pick up the order wire and you tell the guy at the Clark Air Force Base, you tell him what channel you got it on. And if it goes through his system, he picks not. Otherwise, you send it to him on a trunk. So you patch over to a dead telephone line trunk, and he's listening to the call. And then you hear the order wire pick up again. Okay, and then he talks to his buddy over in some island somewhere. And he goes, "We got this telephone call." Okay, and then he sticks it on a trunk. Now you got 3 microwave stations or satellite cable stations listening to this guy's telephone call. I've seen these things work their way all the way to the master control board of Voice of America, and all the guy has to do is flip a switch, and every 1,000,000-watt transmitter in the world would be rebroadcasting this guy's telephone call.
That's real phone preaching at a high level.
Well, this is where all the phone lines came together.
Wow.
You know, I could make the phones ring in people's house totally synthetically from my patch panel. I did it to my parents. The phone would ring, and I'd be connected to this massive trunk line, you know, and I could weave a path to any telephone in the world.
You're the real lawnmower man. Oh my goodness. You're 18?
Yeah, it was great fun to have $2 billion of equipment to play with. And the Navy loved it. Every minute of it.
They did.
Oh, yeah. Oh, they treated me good. They had to. You know, I mean, what more could they ask for? It's all I wanted to do was work on stuff. I didn't join the Navy to sit around or get drunk. It was always enough for me to build my own radio station, you know, and pull my own little Good Morning Vietnam, take the station away from the Air Force, which the Navy thought was great. That was the beauty, is the Air Force, the laugh of the whole thing that everybody loved. I mean, they warned me, you know, Dollar, don't get yourself in trouble, you know, by engineering too many of your own circuits into the defense communications system. You know, I had like phantom circuits running down telephone cables around the base that would like reappear in the radio station and then disappear. You couldn't measure the existence of them, and then they would reappear in another building to turn off the Air Force's equipment by itself. And they didn't know how the signal was sneaking into the transmitter.
So you were sabotaging the Air Force for the Navy.
So I looped their own signal. They heard the echo of their own signal, and they thought that we were transmitting it. It was just a patch cord and a jack on top of a mountain. Took them a year to figure it out.
You were messing. You loved it.
Well, the commanding officer loved it. That's what was important. The whole base loved it. It wasn't just that everybody was behind it. You know, it was just too much fun. And then the GLOM. You know, the Navy wasn't allowed its own GLOM. It couldn't go into its own junkyard. And all the bases, all their test sets were aged and no good, and nobody could find any test sets. So I connived away to the GLOM. Because I took over the Air Force station, I had access to all its paperwork. So I filed the whole Operation Air Force, showed it to the chiefs, they approved it. Okay, the Subic Supply Center would see it as an Air Force request. Would never think the Navy was behind it, except it was all Navy trucks and people that showed up to gather the GLOM. I packed about $750,000 stuff out on the first load and find a brand new crate of all the meters that the Navy was not giving to its own station in its own junkyard, and resupplied every communication station with a brand new test set from the junkyard. The chiefs were just emphatic over the whole thing. They thought it was the most brilliant accomplishment that the Navy had ever achieved.
The greatest GLOM mission of all
To
time.
rip off the Air Force on top of it. Yeah, and they all find their niche in the Navy. And normally you can't get rid of them, but they get you busted. They make you do things that blow stuff up, and it's not a friendly situation. It gets worse on ships.
Wow.
Yeah, and you just can't get rid of these guys, and they're destructive.
But you got rid of this guy.
No, the Master Chief did. I just made it so they could.
You were the point man on that. You gave him.
I attributed system degradation to his presence. He was responsible for system degradation. And already, you know, the problem was well understood, and that's just, I went right to the captain, of course. You know, you don't get to talk to the captain straight. The chiefs do that for you. You know, normally the captain doesn't even want to hear about you. If he does, he wants to punish you for something. You don't want to attract any attention. You know, usually the guy is some maniacal monster that looks terrifying, and you want to stay away from him. Hope he doesn't show up in your hole. These guys, you know, they go off on they have the absolute power. They can become real weirdos. So you don't know who the captain's going to end up being, and most of them are not friendly. They take pride in their nastiness, in the way they can just sweep you off your feet and throw you into oblivion forever. There's nothing you can do about it. So that's the problem with the military. You know, you don't know, you get into a bad situation like with this chief, you know, and he's got, you know, a somewhat executive position at this site, and he's just working over all the sailors all the time and just creating hell, and then it affects the performance of the system. He wanted to continue to make trouble, and I always had him making trouble on circuit test time.
Circuit test?
Yeah, I'd have to test every channel at least once a month, all like 10,000 of them. And there was another guy, his name was Barabbas or something. He was kind of a barbarian that was up at the microwave side. He was the master patch cord guy. And I get that guy at the other end because you want to go through that stuff fast. You have to measure the noise on every channel and the distortion. You usually have to reroute active phone calls and stuff so you don't interrupt them. You got to move the telephone call without disturbing it, check the channel, and this other barbarian guy at the other, you expect to be a monster. It's funny like that in the military. Some guy you expect to be the complete shithead, whatever, is actually the smart guy. And this chief didn't like him and whatever, and kept harassing him and making it so he couldn't work with me. And it started our performance. So I started an engineering report. Took about 4 or 5 months. And then I presented it to my chiefs and pointed out that this chief up at the microwave site had caused a certain amount of degradation in system performance by disturbing the test people, and that he was a problem for the Navy. So the Master Chief looks at that, and his eyes just opens up, and he looks at me with this expression on his face, and he goes, "You know, we've been trying to get rid of this guy for years, Dollard." Thank you. And I get a call a week later from a guy up in the mountain, and he says, "You know what? They got rid of Chief Kelly. He's gone. They threw him out of the Navy." They go, "Don't tell anybody, but you got rid of Chief Kelly." I was the hero. I emancipated Mount Santa Rita from Chief Kelly. The asshole of the universe is what the guy was, you know? A giant hurricane hit the Philippines, and it knocked out the whole microwave system because the water's so dense, the microwave and satellite beams can't even go through it. Well, lo and behold, turns out the emergency transmitter doesn't work. And on top of that, nobody knows Morse code. And they have to get the emergency net going because the bases are all isolated. So at any rate, there's no time for me to be fooling around with any Navy procedure or any of that. So I go back into my childhood mode of hunting for the problem in the transmitter. It was an emergency. Had to get that transmitter working. I had my old little voodoo sticks with neon bulbs and things that these chiefs had never seen before. You know, so I invented this stuff all when I was a child because I didn't have any fancy test equipment. And they wanted to stop it. And the commanding officer put an end to that right then and there. They go, "We got to get this transmitter going. And this is the only guy that can do it and the only guy that knows Morse code. So stand aside and let Dollard do what he's supposed to do." So that was a real slap to Chief Kelly right there. He wanted to start putting all this unsafe working practices. There wasn't any time for that.
Were there lives on the line?
Well, whatever, is we were isolated from the world, had no communications.
The base? Or
Yeah, all the bases, all became isolated
bases where?
in the Philippines.
In the Philippines.
Yeah, the only way to communicate was via shortwave radio. The whole system went dead. If you pick up your telephones, nothing worked.
So for the entire Pacific?
The entire Philippine Islands during this hurricane. You had San Miguel, you had Subic, you had Clark Air Force Base, you had Mount St. Helena, you had Sangley, QB Point. Everybody all of a sudden was all cut off. You couldn't go outside because of the 120-mile-an-hour winds. You're atop of a 12-story microwave site on top of a mountain. You really like to have an emergency radio. when this whole thing's swinging around and lightning is striking the building and sparks are shooting out the deck plate and the chairs are moving around on the floor because the building's being twisted around by the hurricane. It's a scary situation.
And in the middle of this, you have to get this
I have to get this transmitter working.
What happened?
I got it working, of course.
Of course.
That was understood that Dollar would get it working. Dollar can make anything work.
Anything at all.
He doesn't need any test equipment or any help. He does it by these strange things with light bulbs and sticks and pencils and things that scare people. Because you have to do it while the equipment's on. Like holding little light bulbs in my hand and my fingers and making them light up. You know, they're going, ah! I've never seen anything like that before. Figure out why the system was so noisy. And it was obvious after realigning the entire system and finding there was no problem at all that the system wasn't noisy at all. The Air Force gave them bad test procedures, and it made them think that the whole system was screwed up, and they were spending years analyzing and studying it. There wasn't anything wrong to begin with. It was the Air Force's fault.
So they sabotaged the Navy by giving them bad data?
Yeah, the Air Force was all screwed up and refused to use the Bell System standards, and then they got on their high horse, and they're telling everybody else what to do, so they gave the Navy the wrong test specifications, so all you had to do was just switch the test switch one position on the meter, and then all of a sudden there's nothing wrong with the whole system. They spent 2 or 3 years trying to figure out what was wrong, and there wasn't anything wrong at all. It was the Air Force did it.
So you uncovered a conspiracy and saved the Navy billions.
Yeah, well, I got the Air Force out of the deal. It took me to get the Air Force to take the AFRs to S Station away from them, you know, and to eliminate their fingers in the Defense Communications System whole test program, just get them out of it all the way. I mean, you know, the dirt was on their hands. You know, the situation was laughable. You know, here, you know, I was the top guy in broadband carrier communications from Bell Telephone in high school. And, you know, they thought they were going to throw the big one at me, you know, because I was arrogant and had all those weird test scores from school. So, that, you know, the chiefs want to tease a situation or whatever. You know, that's just the way they are. They're going to grab you and they're going to shove you in the hole and they're going to laugh at you. You're an idiot and they're going to help you make a fool of yourself. You know, you're going to figure it out. So I figured it out. And they didn't know what to think about the results. This didn't make any sense. But they already had Navalex from Hawaii and everybody in there, and everybody just threw up their hands. They couldn't figure it out because of some stupid numbers on a piece of paper.
You figured it out. Was it easy or
I
hard?
realigned the entire system and did a complete analysis on all of it, from the channel level all the way to the coaxial cable that disappeared in the South China Sea and popped up in Saigon.
So you did
The whole system, I did a complete realignment, all the pilot checks, and I went through the whole thing from one end to the other.
What was this
every
system?
possible analysis, and the signal to noise ratio was exactly as it was supposed to be, 70 decibels. There was no noise. It was the Air Force test standards and operational procedures did not conform to Bell system practices. All it was is there was a 10 decibel difference in Air Force standards and regular standards, and the Air Force imposed their standards of non-Bell on a Bell design system, and all it could lead to is confusion.
I see.
And nobody would ever believe anything was that simple.
Was this the Navy's entire communications?
This was the entire defense communications system for the Pacific, South China Sea, the whole thing. I worked right at the central link.